Welcome to our channel, Book by Book. Today, we are undertaking a summary of a really foundational work in modern neuroscience. It's David Eagleman's 2015 book, The Brain, The Story of You.
Yeah, and it's more than just a book, isn't it? It's like an intellectual invitation. Eagleman, he's a renowned neuroscientist, obviously, and he takes this incredibly complex thing, the 3 pounds of, tissue inside your skull, and somehow makes it accessible, vibrant even, relevant.
Exactly. And our mission today really is to unpack the 6 core lessons he lays out. We want to turn that complex brain stuff into practical things you can actually use, actionable takeaways for, daily life.
That's the goal, because what's so compelling, I think, is how Eagleman makes us face this big paradox. We're supposedly the smartest species, right? But the actual machine doing the thinking, our brain, we understand it the least.
It's kind of wild when you put it like that. And this summary isn't going to be like some dry textbook reading. No, it's more like a journey into this hidden landscape inside us, how our neural networks basically make up everything we call self-reality, choice.
And it feels urgent now, too. With technology blurring the lines between our minds and machines, understanding the basics of identity feels, crucial.
That's a great point.
Eagleman shows us, basically, if you want to navigate relationships better, manage habits, or even just start thinking about, say, human augmentation in the future, you have to understand the narrator inside your own head first.
Okay, so let's unpack that fundamental idea. Eagleman really pushes back against the old view the brain is just a fixed computer. What's the central argument he offers instead?
Right. The core idea, the big takeaway, is that your brain isn't just an organ. It is the story maker of your life. Think about that. It's the architect building your subjective reality, the editor processing everything coming in from your senses, and the narrator weaving it all together into that continuous story we call you.
Storymaker. Yeah. I like that. It shifts the whole perspective.
It does. Moving from seeing it as static hardware to this dynamic storytelling process, it's absolutely vital for understanding everything else in the book.
So, okay, if we accept this, that our identity, our choices, how we see the world, it's all a product of these hidden, super active neural processes, these networks kind of fighting it out. What's the payoff for you listening? What do we gain from knowing this?
Well, firstly, I think it gives us a dose of intellectual humility, realizing just how much is running on autopilot. Secondly, it definitely sparks curiosity, right? Makes you want to peek behind the curtain of your own consciousness. But most importantly, I'd say, it offers genuine empowerment. Because if you understand how the storyteller works, how it edits, how it fills in gaps, how its different parts compete, you can start to influence it. Maybe not control every single instant outcome, but you can definitely steer the long-term direction of the story. You shift from just passively experiencing things to actively collaborating in how your own mind develops.
That's powerful. I also find the visualization Eagleman uses really helps grasp the scale of it all. He talks about moving away from those textbook diagrams of gray matter and instead imagining the brain as a vast city at night. Yeah. Can you paint that picture for us? What does that reveal?
Oh, it's a fantastic metaphor. Yeah, just imagine this huge, sprawling metropolis. Billions of buildings. Those are their neurons. And the streets, the highways, all lit up with traffic. Those are the synapses, firing information like crazy, connecting everything.
Right.
And you've got distinct neighborhoods, right? Bustling areas for different jobs. This block handles memory, that one processes emotions, another deals with moral choices. But the key thing, the really crucial part, is that this city is never static. It's constantly under construction. Urban renewal happening all the time.
So even right now, listening to this.
Exactly. Just by listening, by learning, thinking about this stuff, you're basically tearing down old, inefficient buildings in that city and rerouting the highways. New connections are forming. It's this constant, hidden, adaptive activity that really defines who we are and what we can become.
Okay, that sets the stage beautifully for the first couple of really big ideas. Let's dive into key lesson 1. This one completely throws out that old idea of the brain being sort of stuck in its ways. Eagleman's concept here is all about transformation, right?
Absolutely. He draws this really critical distinction. Your brain isn't hardwired, it's live-wired. And this isn't just some cute idea about neuroplasticity only happening when you're a kid. No, it's the fundamental operating system for your entire life.
Live-wired.
It means the circuits controlling your habits, your memories, your personality, your skills. They aren't fixed pathways carved in stone, not at all. They're fluid, they're constantly getting stronger, weaker, or even forging totally new paths based on what you do and experience.
That's huge, especially for those of us, who kind of grew up hearing that brain development basically stops after your teens or early 20s. This live-wired idea feels revolutionary. What does it mean specifically for our sense of who we are?
Well, it means every single time you learn something new or feel a strong emotion or consciously practice a skill, like really focus on it, the actual physical connections between your neurons change. Synapses might get stronger, making that pathway quicker, more efficient. Or if you stop using a pathway, it gets pruned away. It's use it or lose it, literally.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about someone learning a language. They're not just memorizing words, they are physically remodeling parts of their brain, like the temporal lobe. They're thickening certain connections, integrating whole new networks. It's a physical change.
So the old view, the hardwired brain, it almost led to this kind of fatalism, didn't it? Like, oh, I'm just bad at math, or I've always been a pessimistic person.
Yeah.
But if the brain is clay, not marble, that whole attitude just collapses.
It completely collapses. And Eagleman gives us exactly that analogy. Your brain is like clay, not marble. Marble is fixed, right? Hard to change. Takes immense effort to chip away at it. But clay is malleable. You are the sculptor. And that honestly might be the most empowering message in the whole book. We are not trapped by the habits or the personality we had in our 20s or 30s or whenever. If you're battling procrastination or trying to finally master guitar, that struggle you feel. That is the physical process of changing your neural pathways. The potential for real deep change is literally built into your biology. You just need to provide the right input, deliberately.
So the focus shifts then. It's less about sheer willpower in the heat of the moment, and more about strategically applying consistent effort, knowing that the physical structure will eventually catch up and adapt to that new routine.
Precisely. We have agency over our direction, our trajectory, even if we don't have perfect moment-to-moment control. Knowing this encourages us to see setbacks differently, too. Not as, like, character flaws, but as signals. Signals that maybe we need to adjust the input, be more consistent, or change the approach to the sculpting process. The brain is always ready to change. We just have to give it clear instructions.
Okay, that covers the dynamic nature, the live-wired brain. Key lesson 2 shifts focus from our internal structure to our external experience. And this one is maybe the most unsettling. Reality is constructed. Eagleman argues that what we perceive isn't the world as it is, but rather the version our brain cooks up for us.
Yeah, this one really bends your mind, doesn't it? We tend to operate under this illusion that our senses, eyes, ears, skin are just passively recording everything like a perfect video camera. Eagleman shows us that's completely wrong. Our experience of reality is an active construction job. It's a personalized version, optimized for quick survival and efficiency, not for objective, perfect accuracy.
But why? Why would the brain simplify things so much? Wouldn't evolution favor accuracy?
It favors utility, what works for survival. Think about the sheer amount of sensory data bombarding us every single second. It's overwhelming, chaotic. If your brain had to consciously process every single photon hitting your retina, every tiny change in air pressure, every nerve-ending firing, you'd be totally paralyzed.
Okay, that makes sense.
So the brain uses these incredibly powerful prediction engines. It filters out tons of what it deems irrelevant detail. It smoothly ignores things like the blind spot in your vision or the fact that your nose is always in your field of view. And crucially, it fills in the gaps. It makes assumptions based on past experiences and expectations.
So it's actively creating this seamless experience, but yeah, at the cost of leaving things out or adding things in.
Yeah.
Which brings us back to that powerful analogy he uses.
Yes, the analogy captures it perfectly. The brain is like a really skilled film editor, sometimes maybe too skilled or too aggressive with the cuts. The raw footage of life is messy, fragmented, full of sensory noise. The editor cuts it down, maybe rearranges the timeline a bit, which explains why our perception of when things happen can sometimes be a bit off, that temporal binding thing.
Right.
And then stitches it all together into a smooth, coherent, easy-to-watch movie. The final movie makes sense, it's digestible, but it only bears a partial resemblance to all the hours of raw footage left on the cutting room floor.
So if my brain is actively chucking out details and filling in gaps, I should probably be a lot less confident about what I saw or exactly what happened. This sounds like it has huge implications for things like memory or arguments.
Precisely. That's why eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable, for instance. When you confidently say, oh, I saw it perfectly, I remember every detail, you're actually recalling the edited film your brain presented to you moments after the event. The brain prioritized creating a story that made sense over logging every single raw data point. Eagleman puts it bluntly, reality is not simply out there, it is something your brain builds for you.
Wow.
The actionable takeaway here is really about perceptual humility. Learning to question that smooth narrative our brain feeds us, acknowledging that our subjective reality is just one possible interpretation among many.
Okay, that's a lot to chew on already. Let's move into key lesson 3. Here, Eagleman challenges something most of us feel very strongly, that sense of a single, unified self. He argues that the you we feel is basically an illusion, and the brain is actually more like a battlefield, with multiple networks competing for control.
Right, this is where we get into the inherent messiness of the human mind. We really like to think there's a single CEO in charge, a rational command center making all the calls. But neurologically, it's much better to view the brain as, say, a federation of specialized systems. And crucially, these systems often have conflicting goals.
Like what?
Well, you've got the circuits driving immediate rewards, often linked to the limbic system. I want that donut now. Battling it out with the circuits responsible for long-term planning and inhibition, which are more associated with the prefrontal cortex. Maybe I should stick to the diet. This internal tug-of-war isn't a sign that you're flawed. It's just how the brain is built. It's architectural.
That totally explains that common feeling of cognitive dissonance, doesn't it? Where I know I should go to the gym, but I feel this powerful urge to just stay on the sofa and watch TV. Like, I consciously decided one thing, but some other part of me, some unconscious network, is pulling hard in the opposite direction.
Exactly. And it leads to so much self-criticism. We beat ourselves up thinking, why can't I just be consistent? Why don't I have more willpower? Eagleman's perspective is that consistency is inherently difficult because these internal networks are almost always in competition for control over your final behavior. Your conscious mind, it usually only registers the outcome, the final decision, not the complex, often messy negotiation that happened under the surface to get there.
So that feeling of unity, the singular I, it's just like a summary.
Pretty much. It's like a convenient summary report the brain generates after the fact to make things feel coherent.
Let's use the analogy he offers to make this internal struggle clearer.
Okay, the analogy is to imagine your mind as a conference room filled with multiple competing presenters. You, your conscious self, you're like the chairperson trying to manage the meeting. Over here, you've got a really loud, insistent presenter, maybe representing primal needs like the hunger network demanding sugary snacks right now. And over there, maybe a quieter, more subtle presenter representing long-term goals, health, discipline. The final outcome of your day, whether you grab the cookie or the apple, depends entirely on which presenter manages to capture the room's attention, which voice speaks loudest, and importantly, which one you, the chairperson, strategically choose to listen to and amplify.
Okay, but this raises a really big question, doesn't it? Both philosophically and practically. If I'm just a collection of competing networks, does Eagleman think this undermines things like personal responsibility, morality, or even the idea of being at fault for something?
He tackles that directly. Understanding the mechanics doesn't just erase accountability, but it does drastically reframe it. Eagleman suggests we should maybe start viewing moral lapses or bad decisions purely as, like, failures of character or spirit. Instead, we could start seeing them as imbalances in this neural competition.
An imbalance. How so?
Well, the goal isn't to somehow eliminate the competing networks that immediate gratification system, for example. It serves important functions too. The goal is to become more aware of the competition and then to strategically strengthen the voices, the networks that align with your conscious values and long-term goals. By realizing you're managing a complex system, you shift from punishing yourself as a flawed unit to figuring out how to better manage a complex architecture.
That feels kinder, actually.
It is, and that self-compassion that comes from understanding the mechanism. Paradoxically, it often leads to more deliberate, thoughtful choices in the long run.
Okay, that's a huge psychological shift. Now, let's pivot from that internal conflict to something external, but just as fundamental. Key lesson 4. You are wired for others. Eagleman argues our brains didn't just evolve in social groups, they evolved for social groups.
Yes, we are fundamentally social creatures. Obligately social, you might say. Perhaps more so than any other species on the planet. So much of what makes us, our sense of identity, our ability to regulate our emotions, even our capacity to predict what might happen next, it's all deeply dependent on how we interact with, perceive, and get feedback from other people.
So it's not just that we like being around others.
It's that we need to be. The very structure of our brain, things like the mirror neuron systems, for example, seem designed to constantly simulate and try to understand the mental states of the people around us. We're built for connection.
Which implies that isolation isn't just, lonely or sad. It's biologically disruptive.
Absolutely. It's like an active threat to your system's balance, its homeostasis. Eagleman points out that things like prolonged isolation or being ostracized or even just chronic misunderstanding, they don't just make you feel bad emotionally, they trigger measurable stress responses in the body. These can mess with your immune system, drag down cognitive performance, even alter the balance of key neurotransmitters. Our very definition of self is relational. It's tied up with others. If you cut off that signal, the system starts to malfunction.
That brings us to another really good analogy he uses, illustrating why genuine connection isn't just a nice to have for brain health, but essential.
Right, think of your brain like a radio that's tuned to a specific station. That station. It's the continuous stream of social interaction, feedback, shared experiences, understanding. Without that signal coming in clear, the radio is just silent. Or worse, it's filled with annoying static, right? Disruptive noise.
And the static could be.
Well, the problem in our modern world often is that we try to substitute that high-quality signal, genuine connection with just high-volume static, things like mindlessly scrolling through superficial social media feeds or passively watching things online that feel social but aren't really interactive. The brain evolved for rich, real-time, back-and-forth interaction. That's what it needs to properly stabilize our sense of self and help regulate our emotions. So investing in real relationships, that is, quite literally, investing in keeping your brain healthy and functioning well.
Okay, now we get to probably the most controversial idea in the book, key lesson 5. This is where Eagleman really challenges that strong feeling most of us have of being in control, of having free will. He argues that decision-making is less free than you think. Why? Because unconscious processes are shaping those decisions long before we even feel like we've made them.
Yeah, this is where the neuroscience really bumps up against some deeply ingrained philosophical ideas. Eagleman draws on a lot of experimental evidence here. He often references studies, maybe not Libet's directly all the time, but similar ones, showing that the electrical activity in the brain signaling an intention to act, like deciding to press a button, actually starts in the motor cortex maybe up to a full second before the person reports consciously deciding to press it.
Wait a second. A full second. So if the brain's already gearing up to make the choice, say, pick the blue shirt over the red one, before I feel like I've consciously chosen the blue shirt, what is my conscious mind actually doing in that moment?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? According to this view, the conscious mind, the part you experience as you making the choice, the very tip of the iceberg, it might be acting more like an observer. Or perhaps it has a kind of veto power. It registers the impulse that's already bubbling up from below, maybe analyzes the potential outcome quickly, and then either lets the action proceed or tries to suppress it.
So it's not initiating, but maybe approving or blocking.
Possibly. Meanwhile, the vast machinery below conscious awareness, the rest of that huge iceberg, has already done the heavy lifting. It's run all the filtering, the predictions, the prep work based on decades of your learned habits, your past experiences, the immediate environment. Eagleman has that powerful, slightly unnerving quote that sums it up. We may feel we are in control, but by the time we know it, the brain has already acted.
Okay, but if the engine room down below has basically already set the course, and my conscious self only catches on a moment later, what's the point of me consciously struggling? Where does my agency, my ability to act freely, actually fit into Eagleman's picture?
This is the crucial pivot. He's not saying agency disappears entirely, he's shifting its focus. We might be pretty bad at controlling the immediate split-second impulse because the unconscious brain machinery is just too fast. But where we do have enormous power is over the inputs that program that machinery over time.
Okay, explain that. Programming the machinery.
Yeah, think of it like this. If your conscious self is the captain on the bridge steering the ship, our real power isn't in constantly wrestling with the rudder second by second. It's in designing the ship itself, training the crew, and calibrating the engines long before you set sail. We exert our agency, our freedom, not through fragile willpower in the moment of temptation, but by consciously shaping the environment and the habits that will dictate those unconscious impulses weeks, months, even years in advance.
Ah, I see. So we control the context, which then influences the unconscious choice that bubbles up. If I want to make a better choice later, I need to set up my environment now so that the better choice becomes the easy default option for that fast unconscious engine.
Exactly. If you're trying to eat less sugar, the common mistake is trying to resist the urge to eat the cupcake when it's sitting right in front of you.
Yeah.
That's a losing battle most of the time. The real success comes from designing your environment beforehand, like not buying the cupcakes in the first place or putting healthy snacks where they're easy to grab. You're creating a system where that lightning-fast impulsive network simply doesn't get the chance to win easily. It's empowerment through strategic awareness. Understanding that our freedom lies more in designing our defaults than in fighting our moment-to-moment biology.
That makes a lot more sense. And it leads really naturally into the final lesson, key lesson 6, which pushes the boundaries of biological design even further. Future brain technology and OPS. Eagleman suggests that emerging tech isn't just going to help us. It's going to radically redefine what being human even means.
Yeah, this lesson is kind of the ultimate expression of that live-wired brain concept. If the brain is fundamentally adaptable, like clay, then technology is becoming this incredibly powerful new sculpting tool. He talks about things like artificial intelligence, brain-machine interfaces, BMIs, and the really mind-blowing potential of sensory augmentation, which he demonstrates directly with his own research.
Let's zoom in on that research, his work on sensory substitution, particularly the VEST device, because that seems like a perfect example of just how flexible the brain really is.
The VEST, it stands for Versatile Extrasensory Transducer. Yes, it's a fantastic demonstration of neuroplasticity in action. It's basically a vest lined with tiny vibrating motors. What it does is take auditory information sound and translates it into complex patterns of vibration across the wearer's torso.
So instead of hearing sound, you feel it.
Initially, yes. The wearer just feels these complex buzzing patterns, a tactile representation of sound. But here's the amazing part. After they wear it consistently for a while, the brain starts to adapt. It doesn't just keep processing those vibrations as touch, it actually starts to repurpose those touch pathways. The sensory cortex begins to interpret those patterns as if it were a new form of hearing, or maybe even seeing with sound.
Wow. So the brain is essentially growing a new sense, a sixth sense, without any surgery, just by being fed a new, consistent stream of information through the skin.
That's exactly it. It shows the brain is fundamentally an input-output device, and it's far less specialized, far more flexible than we used to think. It's basically just waiting for reliable information. If you provide consistent input through whatever channel, the brain will figure out how to process it. It'll allocate neural real estate to make sense of it.
Which leads to some pretty profound questions.
Right. If we can teach the brain to hear through the skin, what happens when we start integrating external memory chips directly via BMIs? Or give ourselves instant mental access to global information databases through AI interfaces? We're starting to seriously blur the boundary between our biological self and the tools we use.
This expansion feels almost existential. It forces us to ask that really critical question about who we are or who we're becoming.
It absolutely does. Eagleman puts it starkly. As technology improves, we will blur the boundary between brain and tool, and that is when you ask, who will we become? And this isn't just some distant sci-fi scenario. It's happening now in subtle ways. Think about how much we rely on our smartphones as external memory, or how sophisticated prosthetics are starting to integrate directly with neural pathways.
We're already upgrading the default human software in a way.
We are. And Eagleman's point is we need to be conscious about it. We have to choose the update package intentionally, not just passively accept every new app or device. We need to be deliberate. Are the tools we're integrating encouraging deep focus, learning, connection, or are they fundamentally rewiring us for distraction, superficiality, and constant dopamine hits? The choice is increasingly ours.
Okay. That brings us neatly to the application phase. We've covered these 6 really profound lessons. They show us we're dynamic, constructed, conflicted internally, deeply social, subtly controlled by unconscious forces, and perpetually evolving beings, especially with technology. Before we get into the specific actionable steps, let's just quickly recap those core theoretical frameworks Eagleman wants us to really internalize. The mental tools, if you like.
Yeah, good idea. There are maybe 4 key concepts to keep front of mind. First, absolutely crucial, is the difference between being live-wired versus hardwired. That's the bedrock of possibility of change. Second, visualizing the brain as a cityscape. Remembering those competing neighborhoods, the constant remapping, the power struggles happening under the surface that drive our behavior.
Okay.
Third, understanding the narrative self. Realizing that the smooth, coherent story of who I am is largely an edited version, constructed by the brain below awareness, constantly filtering reality and filling in the gaps based on expectations.
And fourth,
the proof of concept we just discussed, sensory substitution and augmentation. Seeing that as concrete evidence that the brain's limits are far wider than we imagine, and its flexibility is just astounding.
got it. So those concepts give us the why. Why we're sometimes inconsistent, why our memory isn't perfect, but also why change is fundamentally possible. Now, the final crucial step is translating all this neural knowledge into specific practical things we can do. Let's turn these ideas into that actionable blueprint for the listener.
Exactly. This is the so what section. How
Right.
do we actually use this understanding to live more intentionally?
Okay, let's frame this as the practical guide. How to become the intentional sculptor of your own, very malleable, clay-like brain. The first step seems obvious.
Yeah.
We have to really embrace that change is constant.
Yes. Step 1, be curious about change. Really internalize that live-wired concept. Stop identifying so strongly with past failures or perceived limitations. I'm just not a morning person. I'm terrible with names. Since we know the brain can change, try picking one tiny new skill or microhabit, literally today. Maybe learn one new word in another language or commit to just 5 minutes of mindfulness practice. And here's the key. Consciously notice how difficult or awkward it feels at first. Then stick with it just for maybe 2 weeks. And notice how that initial friction starts to lessen. You are literally observing neuroplasticity in real time. You're feeling the strengthening of a new pathway because of your deliberate input.
That's great. Okay, the next action relates back to key lesson 2, challenging our constructed reality. When we feel really certain about something, especially in a disagreement, we need to inject a little healthy doubt.
Exactly. Action 2, pause and question perception. When you find yourself really dug in on an issue or maybe upset about something someone did, instead of immediately defending your version of reality, take a mental step back. Ask yourself, okay, which part of my brain might be filtering this experience right now? What important details might my internal film editor have conveniently left out? What expectations did my brain use to fill in the blanks here? Just asking those questions introduces a pause, a moment of objectivity. It allows you to consider that maybe, just maybe, there are other valid ways to interpret the raw footage of the situation.
That's a useful habit. And what about when that impulse strikes? When we find ourselves acting against our better judgment, how do we handle that internal conflict without just resorting to guilt?
Right. Action 3. Notice internal conflict. Don't just react to it. When you hit snooze for the 5th time, even though you know you wanted to get up early, or when you find yourself procrastinating on that important project, recognize what's happening. See it as those multiple networks battling it out, like in the conference room analogy. Don't waste precious mental energy on guilt or self-flagellation. Instead, try to label the players. Okay, that's the limbic system screaming for immediate comfort, and it's currently drowning out the prefrontal cortex's plan for the future. And then, consciously, deliberately, strategically, try to support the network you want to win. Maybe that means creating a small, immediate reward for doing the difficult thing, just to give that long-term planning network a slightly louder voice next time the conflict arises in that internal meeting.
Managing the meeting, not just being run by it. Okay, now, given the absolute biological necessity of connection from lesson 4, what's the concrete step for feeding our social brain what it needs?
Action 4. Invest in connection. We've established that superficial scrolling is just static. The brain needs real signal. This means consciously prioritizing meaningful back-and-forth interactions. Actually schedule that video call, or better yet, an in-person meetup with a close friend. And when you're there, aim for genuine engagement, vulnerability, shared attention, real listening. Try to actively reduce the time spent passively consuming media that just simulates social contact, and consciously replace it with actively cultivating those few, deep relationships that really provide the high-quality signal your neural architecture needs to stay stable and healthy.
Quality over quantity, definitely. Now, addressing that tricky issue from lesson 5, our limited conscious control in the moment. How do we practically design our environment to nudge our unconscious choices in better directions?
This is key. Action 5. Build decision buffers. Since we know the fast, impulsive networks often act before our conscious awareness fully catches up, we need to intentionally create friction for the bad choices and make the good choices smoother, easier. So, for any really important decision, maybe a big purchase, firing off a potentially heated email, or reacting in an argument mandate, a pause for yourself, create a rule. I will not decide this instantly. Instead, collect the information, then physically walk away for an hour, sleep on it if possible, let yourself reflect, then come back and make the decision. That pause gives the slower, more analytical networks in your brain the time they need to weigh the options properly before the impulsive system hijacks the steering wheel.
Create space for the slower networks. I like that. And finally, thinking about the future brain and technology from lesson 6, how do we become intentional managers of our own upgrades?
Action 6. Scan your technology habits. Start viewing your smartphone, your apps, your daily digital routines not as neutral tools, but as active forces that are constantly shaping your neural wiring through the input they provide. Ask yourself honestly, is this particular app strengthening my ability to focus deeply, to think critically, to connect meaningfully? Or is it fundamentally training my brain for constant distraction, shallow engagement, and quick dopamine hits? Be deliberate about the digital environments you inhabit. If an app consistently strengthens networks you don't value, like distraction, seriously consider deleting it. If a new technology offers powerful augmentation, like tools for learning or creativity, engage with it consciously and intentionally, directing its power towards your goals.
And that brings us right back around to the beginning, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Back to the clay analogy, our environment, including our digital environment, is maybe the most powerful sculpting tool we have.
It absolutely is. Which leads to a final overarching action. Nurture change via environment. Since your brain will constantly adapt to whatever inputs it receives most consistently, consciously design your physical space, your schedule, your social circles, and your digital world to reinforce the future self you want to become. If you want to write more, make your writing space inviting and free of distractions. If you aim to eat healthier, make sure healthy options are the easiest things to grab. You are essentially creating a low-friction pathway for your intentional, goal-oriented networks to win more of those internal battles, ensuring that your incredibly adaptable, live-wired brain rewires itself in the direction you choose.
Wow. So wrapping this up, the brain, the story of you. It's really not just a science book, is it? It feels much more like an empowering owner's manual for ourselves, rooted firmly in biology. It's like an invitation to maybe shed some of those comfortable old myths about having a fixed identity or just being a passive observer of our lives, and instead really engage with ourselves as the dynamic, complex, and constantly evolving neural reality that we actually are.
That's beautifully put. When you truly grasp that your brain is live-wired, not static, you naturally become more proactive about the inputs you feed it, the experiences, the learning, the relationships. And when you realize that the self you experience is a narrative, a story your brain is constantly editing, you become more deliberate about the kind of story you want to live out. You realize that, yes, you're a product of your biology, but you're also the chief architect who gets to manage and shape that biology moving forward.
Okay, to help make these huge, potentially paradigm-shifting ideas really stick, let's quickly recap the top 5 key lessons from this book-by-book summary.
All right, first, your brain is live-wired. You are fundamentally like clay, not marble, built for continuous growth and change throughout life.
Second, reality is constructed. Remember, it's an edited film, not a perfect recording. Always pause and question your filters and first impressions.
Third, multiple yous live inside. It's a conference room, not a monarchy. Learn to manage the competing networks with awareness, not just self-criticism.
Fourth, you are profoundly wired for connection. Your brain needs high-quality social interaction for its basic health and stability. Invest accordingly.
And fifth, technology plus brain is future you. The boundary is blurring. Design your technological environment and upgrades with conscious intention.
Eagleman leaves us with that really inspiring final thought, which perfectly captures everything we've talked about. The story of you is still being written, and your brain is the pen. Such a powerful reminder that our potential isn't really limited by who we were yesterday, but only by the quality, the consistency, and the intention behind the input we choose to provide our amazing brains starting today.
And perhaps the final provocative thought I could leave you, the listener, with is this. Given everything we now know about the brain's incredible capacity for change, for sensory substitution, for integrating new inputs, what new, maybe extraordinary, perhaps entirely unknown capacity could you unlock if you committed, truly committed, to providing your live-wired brain with some radically new and reliable sensory or cognitive input starting tomorrow? What might be possible?
What a compelling challenge. A great place to end our thinking for today. Thank you so much for joining us for this helpful summary from the channel Book by Book. If you found these insights valuable and you'd like more book summaries like this one, we'd be really grateful if you would subscribe to this channel for more such helpful book summaries. Share it with others who might benefit, and please like it. That really motivates us to keep digging into these books and bringing you the best summaries we can. We'll see you next time, Book by Book.